Hello, welcome back. And for this second part of the Leyendecker series, we are going to paint a pear. And the reason we're going to paint a pear is it's very, very simple. It's a really kind of like a mundane little object. And we're going to try and take something like that and apply some of the learnings that we have from this Leyendecker approach to painting and see if we can give that pear kind of a unique twist. I think it'll be a good way to study the way that images are handled by this artist. Also, I think it'll be just fun to do something beyond a master copy or a master study or something like that, because for me, I don't really enjoy painting the master paintings very much. I think it's good practice, but I'd much rather do something of my own. And in this series, I wanted to do both because I think there are two very good ways to learn. I thought it was important to start with the master study, which was the one you see here, but I wanted to quickly get to painting something original. And in order to do that, I needed to kind of immerse myself in paintings from the artist, and you can start to see some of the design trends, brushwork, etc. And you can see their inspiration. He was an artist who was inspired by and studied Alphonse Mucha when he was in Paris. He's an artist who lived at a very poignant time. I think that turn from Art Nouveau to Art Deco is seen in the work of Leyendecker. And so you can see that, some of the inspiration, the line work, the outlining, the way in which he's the hyper focus on the figures in these near to full body expanses, like that's just very inspired by Mucha. You can see though with Mucha there's much more ornamental, organic, and nature derived stylizations than we see in Art Deco. So we're looking at that kind of golden age of illustration that's from like 1880 to around 1930. You have a movement from this Art Nouveau to the Art Deco. You have artists like Norman Rockwell who are idealizing the work of Leyendecker and very much inspired by his work in the Saturday Evening Post. And you have artists like Howard Pyle, whose work we've seen, all of us have seen that image there on the left. These are some of the artists who shaped our entire world. N.C. Wyeth is someone who I look at all the time. I just love the paintings that come from his hand. And I think, can you imagine, right, working at a time in the world when even Maxfield Parrish is painting these idyllic scenes with this very interesting approach to realism, and all of that kind of in front of this backdrop of Art Deco, where you get this geometrification of shape, this abstraction of even the human body. We're looking at a time where, of course, Picasso is doing his thing, and Leyendecker is a commercial artist, an illustrator, and he's able to take inspiration from this stuff, but his purpose is not to push the avant-garde in the same way that like a Picasso would be. His job is is commercial, right? He's advertising products and kind of right there in the heart and center of culture making with respect to clothing and fashion and high society and so on. It's a very important role that he played. The magazine cover artists at that time were basically predecessors to the Drew Struzans of the world, who were the movie poster artists of the 80s, right? And I think if we've got that kind of impact, right, that these artists have, they were definitely had their finger on the cultural pulse of America at that time. It's a time when the United States was immersed in the kind of the advent of mass culture, mass media, spectator sports. There's a lot of new technologies in which information is being disseminated right there before and after, and then before another world war, whole global conflicts. There's just so much going on at this time in life, and artists like Leyendecker are at the very center of it. And so it's very much worth studying their work. So onward to our canvas. as I said before, we're going to paint a pear, and a lot of the time I have my students start with something simple like a pear. And the reason why is it is, you could literally like drop your stylus while drawing a circle and you would have a pear. It's one of those things that you almost can't get the shape wrong. So it's very low barrier of entry, very like high tolerance for mistakes. Drawing pears is just an exercise in learning to look at shapes of light and dark, which is why in my Domestica class I did this as a version of this for the exercise that we used for one of the lead-ups to our final project. We did it in a different way, but it's something that I kind of lean on a little bit, because you get to look at the way that shape and form are interacting with light source, and you can start to work on those planar surfaces and help kind of create that illusion of 3D, but it's not so uniform as like an apple, which is largely more spherical, and it's not as kind of oblong as a banana. It kind of has enough undulating form that it actually is a good way to begin painting something like the human figure or the human face or something like that, because there's just so much more shape to it, and it's a little less symmetrical than some of the other things. That said, with respect to Leyendecker, I think that how we're starting this pair is just very basic. We're doing my normal process when I teach painting to anyone, beginner or advanced. It's that we frame in the line work with angular mark. That's our step one. Our step two is to go ahead and apply some value. We like to start with our darker values and work up toward our lighter values. The reason we do that is to establish our value scale early on. If we have a white paper or near to white paper or canvas, then getting those darks in early not only gives us the bones and structure of the piece, but it also gives us that point of contrast for that whole value scale and spectrum in the piece, from lightest light to darkest dark, and we can kind of work on everything in the middle. Once that's all blocked in with local color, then our third step is to use some blending tools. And so here I've just kind of set the tool to blend and used a brush that has a nice bristle to it. And I'm just kind of knocking down and smoothing out any of my hard edges. This is something that works incredibly well in Rebelle, because you have the ability to grab any of the brushes in your whole repertoire, and you can turn that into a blender. So it's the equivalent of taking a brush with no paint on it and just kind of dry brushing over, or just kind of blend brushing over your wet paint. So it's like you're going into the wet paint and then just kind of brushing into it to create those tones that are in the middle, right in between your lights, darks, midtones, whatever. And as you can see, it's just a really quick and elegant process. So I think one of the things I look at when I see Leyendecker is that he does have a strong background in the fundamentals. So he has that capacity to break down complex subjects quite quickly and render them out in a beautiful way. And so we can see that, he's drawn these figures very realistically, but then he does sort of this like post-rendering treatment. It's like in modern day times, it's sort of like the equivalent of like an AI processing or AI filter, or some kind of filter you might put on the photo after the fact. And if there was such a thing as a Leyendecker filter, it would be one that accentuates the outer contour, and it does it both through a highlighting linear element and a shadowy linear element. So it's going to grab like a burnt umber, burnt sienna, kind of dark brown color or medium to dark brown color, and it's going to outline the entire shape with these kind of bold, angular, and almost comic book kind of marks. These kind of marks are designed to be very dynamic, energetic, and give the piece a visual punch. That's really the whole schema of his work, is that it's designed to give a lot of strong visual impact through a lot of dynamic mark making and strong linear elements. So there is an underpainting that is realistic, but once we get to the stylization, which is where we're at now, We need to use intentionally angular brushwork. We need to use kind of exaggeratedly angular contouring. And then we need to make sure that those contouring elements are using both a black and a white outline. Further, I think it's important to go into those shadowy areas, and then we start to break up that nice smooth blending with an overlaid brushstroke or series of brushstrokes that sort of activates those tones, those values with more linear elements. Those linear elements are coming in the form of brushstrokes, so you're just literally making some very attractive looking brushstrokes, keeping everything incredibly dynamic and kind of going from there. It's really a balance of figuring out how much of the underpainting to leave and then how much of that kind of angular brushwork you want to push into the final. With his, I think what we see is that he does go pretty far to activate many of the surfaces with some more interesting brushwork. And I think the only thing you really have to do is make sure that the strokes you're putting down are thick enough. I think in this demo, they were a little thin, but the point is still made that, you know, you can still see them. Their value range is pretty much on par with the underpainting, but there's just some subtle differences to make sure that those brushstrokes are evident, not just from the thickness of the paint, but also from the shift in the color or value that's there when he puts that overpainting on. So with that said, we've got a couple things left to do. One is going to be to kind of put some tone in the background and then do the white paint over like he does. He very often would just get kind of like too white and use kind of a stiff bristle brush and just knock down those backgrounds with, again, more dynamic, angular, quick mark making to make that, even though monochromatic background, stay very active. So all of this kind of comes together in a way that is cool because it still looks really realistic. It looks like we're painting realism, but like I was saying, comparing to kind of like modern day filters we might have in our phones or our apps or whatever, it just adds that like pop of some, abstraction. And that abstraction is absolutely designed to be very like poppy. If this is, remember, this is a commercial artist or a graphic artist or an artist who's looking to be publicity oriented, or this is someone whose work is intended to help market or promote or sell products or brands or identities in such a way that that it's it's definitely not fine art, but that's just wrapped up in the goal. So that's about all we can do there. Now we're at a fun part, and it has a little bit to do with painting, but a lot to do with stylization. And the way we're going to get at this is to use the warp tool. This is very similar to like the liquefy tool in Photoshop, where you can kind of turn the artwork into something that's very pliable and stretchy. The reason why I'm doing this is if you look at the figures that we used as our inspiration, like kind of use them as our design key, those two figures are, they're realistic. They look like real people, but there's a stylization to the nose, to the mouth, to the eyes, to the hair. Everything is sort of designed around a sort of a schema where there's just a slight, just like a stylization, like something that's not like realistic about them. So what we're doing is something similar with the pear, is we're stretching it and warping it to make it look more attractive, let's say, to make the right and left side look a little different, to make it a little bit taller instead of as wide, to give it a little bit more of a dynamic elegance. And so that's kind of how I would summarize the look of these two figures, and that's kind of how I want to summarize the look of this pear. So no offense to that little pear in its original form, but trying to align it to the design intentions and goals and kind of perspective of Leyendecker, I wanted to kind of get at it and give it a little bit of this, like a little bit more elegance, let's say. So you can see the brush that I have here selected. It's down in the bottom corner of the screen. And I feel like this is a picture perfect tool for painting the backgrounds like Leyendecker does. how cool is that it's just a default brush that you can just lay these sorts of amazing strokes on top of each other and make it look so fantastically similar to the artist. So as I said, the goal here was to take a mundane object, paint it in the style of the artist, see if we can pull that off, and I absolutely think we did. We have altered the shape, altered the contour, altered the design, altered the approach, altered the texture, altered the brushwork, created kind of a schema for how we handle all that stuff, and we have a pretty successful piece. And we can now look at the 3 steps: the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we can say, we got this. Now let's move on to our next challenge.